All right, students, this is our last recorded lecture. We're going to be covering value-based pricing and pricing strategies. Hopefully, you recognize that throughout these recorded lectures, based upon um, Dr. Best's textbook, that we really are sort of riffing on an original theme, which is the customer value map. And what are the implications of moving around that customer value map in terms of the four P's of marketing: product, price, promotion, and placement? And then certainly blending um, the aspects of accounting and finance with marketing to develop data-based marketing strategies. That's really the objective here. So here we're looking at value-based pricing. We're going to appreciate the notion of value-based pricing versus cost plus pricing. We'll talk about how those are different and how are those strategies incorporated in the product life cycle, which we've referenced a couple of times, as well as the pricing strategies, which would exist for different products along the customer value map and within different stages of the product life cycle. So here, excuse me, we would say, and we appreciated in the last lecture that Mac has certainly, I think, has historically had more of a premier brand positioning versus a traditional PC. And so here we would say here, excuse me, 41% in pre-launch price research would pay more than $800. Again, these slides are a little dated, but sort of gives you an idea about almost half are willing to pay more than $800 for a Mac, as opposed to for a PC, only 20% are willing to pay more than $800. So again, we can see a pretty clear example of the sort of the pricing aspect of having a premier positioned brand. So here, let's look at iPad product pricing. We can see again this sort of the combination of performance and price. We have more of an iPad here with Wi-Fi and 3G occupying a broader, or excuse me, a higher brand positioning, and then therefore able to reap higher uh, prices versus just an iPad with Wi-Fi. So you can sort of see what's the delta to add 3G. It looks like what is that, $130, something like that. Yeah, 130. So this pricing strategy, if we can sort of deconstruct the what's the value in the customer's mind around the various components of a total solution, in this case, in iPad. Well, so we're going to move here within the Apple family, but move to an iPod. Some of you may not even know what an iPod is, but it was very revolutionary in the day. It was basically saying, why have a CD player when you can just, on a memory chip, be able to store all of your music? So that was quite revolutionary, I'd say, about 20 years ago. Now everything's on your phone, right? But you can see here we have this similar kind of theme. We start with the microeconomic concept of a demand curve, different sections of the demand curve, less elastic, and more elastic. And then here, as we sort of move downstream, we have lower prices and then therefore occupying um, lower positions, but still below the customer value map. Um, excuse me, below the customer value line. All right. So, a couple of different extremes for us to appreciate. One way that we could price our product or service would be cost plus. So here we're looking at what are the components here in this case to um, make a PC or a computer. So I've got to purchase subcomponents, I've got to have people to put it together, and then I've got capital equipment. So now I have what is the total cost of manufacturing a computer? What is sort of my desired margin? It looks like here my markup would yield a desired margin of 25%. And now I'm giving room for the retailer to be able to recoup their section of the overall profit going from manufacturer all the way to retail. Okay. So that would be one way that we can um, mark up, start from costs and then mark up to 940 here from a cost-based standpoint, as opposed to, I would say, here I'm starting with the other end of the spectrum, right? So I'm starting with what are customers willing to pay, what are competitors offering their products at, and then for my particular company, where does my company's brand and competitive position lie within the entire industry landscape? So now I'm starting from what are customers willing to pay, and then I'm able to work backwards instead of forward. So um, the example I typically use for this notion of cost-based versus market-based is, for example, cost-based makes a lot of sense if you're selling something like a PC or a MacBook. On the other hand, God forbid, if you needed to have heart surgery, well, what would be the price that you would be willing to pay to make sure that your heart surgery goes well? Well, you're probably going to not view it as, the cost of the surgical equipment. I have to buy the surgeon. I have to lease a surgical room and work that way, right? I'm probably going to say, holy cow, I mean, I've only got one heart. I'm willing to pay a lot of money to make sure that my heart surgery comes out perfectly. Of course, we've got insurance to hopefully help us pay for all of that. And now I'm going to work backwards. I wouldn't say, well, I'd be willing to bid out my heart surgery and, I'll go with the lowest, the cheapest surgeon I can find. No, I'm probably going to say, hey, if the best surgeon costs $1 million, then that's what I'm willing to pay. And then I'm going to work backward from that. So maybe sort of a dramatic example, but that's an example of that I use to differentiate between cost-based and market-based pricing. We're back to digital cameras is sort of an anachronism, right? Everybody pretty much has a phone now, so not a lot of, I mean, certainly professional photographers purchase digital cameras, but for most of us, we just use our phone. But nevertheless, here we have our demand curve. We can appreciate that maybe there is a market-based equilibrium price, but there might be, or there would be, a more of a cost-based kind of price where, again, as we talked about Porter a couple of lectures ago, what is my brand strategy? Is my marketing strategy based upon low cost provider? Is it a cost-based price, or is it a differentiated kind of price, and I'm able to offer different and better features and benefits than my competition, and therefore I'm able to uh, reap a premium because of that differential. Now, we could certainly overprice something, and the certainly Adam Smith sort of demonstrated the efficiency and sort of the dispassionate way in which uh, microeconomics and supply and demand curves sort of cut through and sort of result in various outcomes. So if I overprice something, guess what? I'm probably not going to sell as many of those. If I underprice, I'll probably, assuming it's a product or service that is in demand, I will sell more, but I'm going to forfeit some profit, right? Because I've moved down the demand curve and because I've lowered, I've occupying a lower price. I've established a lower price for my product or service, selling more but less overall profit. We've talked about this idea of total cost of ownership. Um, and we talked about it in the context of uh, printers, but it applies to many different product categories here. Um, we can think about if you own a car, certainly there's the price that you pay, but here are all of these hidden costs that sort of lie behind, excuse me, below sort of this metaphorical iceberg. And as an owner of an automobile, you've got all these additional costs that you have to factor into the overall cost associated with owning a car. By the way, it's interesting here. Why did Uber and Lyft become a thing? Well, if you live in a big city in particular, why would I own a car if I live in the downtown of a major metro area when I'm moving a couple of blocks one way or the other? Why would I want to have all of this cost? Why don't I just quote unquote lease or, excuse me, rent a car, i.e., engage an Uber for 5 or 10 minutes? I'll let them pay for all of these costs associated with owning that car. And I will just pay for the usage of that car to go from point A to point B in a very defined time frame and a very defined distance. So here is another example of how we can um, uh, view value-based pricing based upon um, maybe I'm able to achieve scale better than my competition. I'm able to, because of my efficiency in managing some of these overall costs, that I'm able to pass or able to reap the savings here, um, and I'm able to um, uh, here through managing this efficiency, I can maybe even charge a higher price than my competitor, just about 10%. But because of my superior management in the ownership costs, I'm able to raise the price versus competition and achieve greater um, profitability versus the competition. Life cycle value pricing. Again, here we sort of bring in our product life cycle idea that here's our product Biotronics versus the competition. Here it looks like the competitor, the operating costs are 15,000 a year going out for 5 years, as opposed to Biotronics, which has an initial price that is $10,000 higher, but then the ongoing operational costs or kind of life cycle pricing, I'm able to um, achieve. A, I can charge $10,000 more because my annual life cycle cost is much lower. It's almost half of my competitor. Here we sort of bring in again the idea of this brand reputation. There's again, how do I sort of uh, dimensionalize this customer value below the fair value line? Lots of different, we sort of deconstruct that overall purchase. What are the key drivers of purchase of uh, a, a, a product and what versus the benefits associated from a customer value perspective? If we sort of deconstruct this, right? So we've got here in terms of uh, a product that is priced at $3 per square foot with full trim finish versus paint finish versus pricing. We're able to take advantage of those preferences that customers have around different states of finish here. So if I look at, again, I'm sort of deconstructing this total. I've got 50% finish trim, 43%, 50 plus 43 is uh, 93, and then 7% price. So here we're again looking at the overall drivers of product or service purchase and deconstructing the ways that customers think about um, various components of the overall product or service. And then the implications are if here at the price per square foot, we can see that's quite elastic, almost perfectly elastic demand curve, if you will, and see we would deduce that the demand curve or price curve for a particular segment of the customer target audience, if their demand curve looks like this, then we would deduce that they would be more of a quality conscious kind of customer. Now, here, if we look at, as opposed to only 7% of driving the price performance, here we have someone that is much more price conscious. And we can see that 70% of the overall price performance ratio for this segment, the price conscious segment, is made up of price. So at least in this segment's view, this is a commoditized product or service, and therefore the pricing strategy associated with that brand or that product is going to be critical in capturing the price conscious customer because they essentially view this product or service as a commodity, and 70% of the reason they buy or don't buy is associated with the price, as opposed to quality conscious, where half of it is around the finish trim, and then almost another half is around the paint finish, and only 7% is driven by price. Now, one thing we can do, again, if we have lots of different components here that make up an entire solution and we deconstruct it from a pricing standpoint, what's interesting is that I could customize my value pricing based upon a theoretically an individual customer. Um, So there are some fairly sophisticated, what's called conjoint models where I can categorize even at an individual level their value construct based upon the trade-offs that they make in when they are presented with some hypothetical scenario in various product feature kinds of options here. So, for example, in this PC example, what is more important to me? Is it memory or hard drive? Is it operating system or warranty? And all of those elements, I can, in a conjoint sense, I can determine or impute what is the overall utility value associated with buying a PC. So, in my case, for example, when I buy a laptop or a PC, I'm certainly focused on acquisition price, but I want it to go fast. I want it to have a lot of memory, a lot of storage space. I want it to operate in a way that is seamless and to have a good warranty. So for me, I would probably be more willing to pay on the higher end of a price value curve versus someone else because I have some more, at least what I would believe are some premium needs associated with buying a PC. Here we can see we might we might start with our flagship product here at 1500 and work our way down. Again, we see this similar kind of curve, this sort of value, customer value curve, where maybe my flagship product is here up at the top. I've got sort of a basic product down here, and then I sort of fill in the gaps, and that allows me through the trade-off of cost and features and benefits that are offered to address these subsegments along this overall curve from the bottom to the top. So now if we take again this same thought process and we carry it across the product life cycle, again, we refer to Dr. Levitt and his seminal article, Exploit the Product Life Cycle. What are sort of the dynamics around determining a pricing strategy depending upon where the product is in its life cycle? So again, we sort of harken back to the product life cycle concept of Levitt's in the early market, early adopter market. I'm able to garner a higher price because we have customers that are early adopters and they're willing to pay more than the quote average customer because they have to have it first. But excuse me, as we recognize over the life cycle of the product, I'm going to have to change my pricing strategy based upon, or certainly the recognition of the commoditization of that product from being more of an innovative product all the way to where there are many competitors here in this maturity phase, many competitors, and therefore there's going to be more price pressure to maintain or even gain market share within that overall mature market. Here is, we've talked about GE quite a bit here. Um, Again, we look at this kink demand curve. We see that at least GE had determined that there are sort of two different brand positions here in this kink demand curve, the less elastic and the more elastic here. And therefore, they have a pricing strategy that is associated with these two very different brand positions when viewed through the lens of the customer value map. So one of the questions would be, when do we reduce price? Well, we're sort of reducing price, or at least we're increasing at a decreasing rate, let's say, as I go up this product life cycle. But at some point, we recognize that when a product segment is in the mature stage that we will need to begin reducing price in order to reflect the commoditization of this particular product segment. Good example, I've mentioned in a couple of lectures that I worked for 20 years for a printer manufacturer company, Lexmark. But when I joined the company, believe it or not, one of the things that we as a laser printer and inkjet printer manufacturer that still made were typewriters. Now, if you're young, you might have to look in a history book to see what a typewriter is. But before we had Microsoft Word and what initially were called word processors, people typed documents using a typewriter. And so Lexmark, when we were building those typewriters again 20, 30 years ago, we would lower the price, but it was what would we would call, for example, a Boston Consulting Group model, a cash cow. Really almost no innovation in the typewriter market, and most extraordinary profits relative to other products in a product portfolio. So even when I'm reducing my price, I'm still achieving a significant amount of profitability. And we certainly did that. You might be asking, well, um, who was buying typewriters in 1990? Well, some certainly in the US and North America, but quite a bit at that time in Latin America and Asia. And so um, that was where we sort of managed that cash cow, and we would reduce the price. But again, it was significant profitability at the unit level because, um, again, there was almost no innovation. The costs associated with producing that product was, uh, you know, primarily a function of the manufacturing cost and then the logistics and distribution cost associated with getting the product from the plant to somewhere in Latin America or in Asia. So here we're in this harvest pricing. Again, we recognize through the lens of this product life cycle that we continue to reduce price because of this recognition that this is the point in the product life cycle stage where that product or service is commoditized. So now let's look at pricing strategies and profit impact. So we might be asking, what is the price elasticity associated with an Apple Mac? Um, if we decide to cut our price by almost 4%, the question is, what would the impact be in overall profitability? So here we're sort of solving for what would be the sales number associated, or the number of, or excuse me, the total revenue associated with reducing price by 4%, no change in volume. You can see the demand stays the same, share price or market share 5.6% stays the same, but yet I'm reducing the price by 4%. I can sort of infer what is that total revenue figure that's going to be associated with reducing my price by 4%, right? And certainly what we would sort of expect here is at the gross profit level, we've basically reduced our gross profit by almost $1 billion by, again, the volumes are the same, but I've reduced the price by almost 4%. um, Here I'm conducting analysis. I'm sort of trying to impute where is my product or service on the product life cycle. Remember, because this is sort of a backward looking notion. You don't necessarily know at any point in time where you are on this curve, you have to sort of look at it with the rear view mirror, and how do we determine that? Well, what happens when I reduce my price from 4% to 10% here? And so what's interesting is that the price elasticity of demand uh, goes from uh, goes from current. I've conducted some kind of analysis. If we want to maintain um, our profits, then we can see the volumes are the same here. If we reduce price, right, to 10%, then we believe we're going to gain share from 5.6 to 6.6. My sales at the top line level are going to increase from 21 to 23 to 24, but my gross profit goes down when I was looking at, a 4% decrease. But if I reduce by um, 10%, right? If I reduce to 1249, yields a 10%, excuse me. So if I reduce my price to 1249, it yields a 10% volume increase. And that allows me to maintain my gross profit of 5.46 billion because I'm sort of looking in the rear view mirror. Where am I on this demand curve? Um, so am I in this upper kind of section? Well, no, because if I'm in more of a mature stage of the product life cycle, I I can certainly infer that a greater reduction in price will increase at a disproportionately higher from a quantity demanded standpoint. And therefore, I'm going to, in this case, um, be able to maintain my my profits uh, by reducing my price to 1249. It yields a 10% volume increase. We can see we're just sort of carrying this analysis through uh, in various scenarios here based upon the price elasticity of demand. Where does my product lie on the demand curve? And here we're sort of inferring that this demand curve is kinked, and therefore, as I reduce my price, I can impute what is the price elasticity of demand based upon what is my proposed change in price. What does that do to my overall gross profit here? This is sort of a breakdown to be able to appreciate um, where am I in the demand curve, whether it's more elastic. Here, up at the top of this kink demand curve, I've got these various scenarios. Do I raise my price, lower my price? If I'm in more of the elastic part of the demand curve, do I raise or lower? And here, I want to be able to appreciate on these four different diagnostic metrics what happens to units, what happens to revenue, what happens to unit margin, and overall total contribution margin. And here, through this detailed scenario analysis, we've sort of imputed that here, when I'm sort of in an elastic part of the demand curve, that if it is at -1, or sort of really at a sort of a midpoint of that demand curve, if I hold my price, I don't anticipate any changes in again, theoretically, in volume, unit volume, or sales revenue. But if I'm at this inelastic, sort of the top part of the demand curve here, so up here, if I reside sort of here, my product resides in sort of that part of the kink demand curve. And maybe it's because of where I reside, or my product resides in this product life cycle. I can sort of scenario plan, I can sort of scenario plan what will happen if I raise my price or lower my price uh, as a function of where do I reside on the kink demand curve. Now, one of the things we want to appreciate from managerial accounting and cost accounting is this idea of break-even analysis. So we are trying to determine through this analysis where is the break-even market share here in this theoretical example. We have break-even market share, looks like right around 12%. And what's the volume at 25 million? So what we would say, right, the actual calculation of a break-even point is divided, fixed expenses divided by price minus unit cost, right? So what is my gross margin associated with just at the above the gross margin level in the income statement? Fixed expenses divided by contribution. Here in this hypothetical example, we would say based upon market demand, I need to maintain a market share of around 12% to break even because my fixed expenses at the firm level are 50 million. However, if I'm able to increase market share above 12%, then I should be able to reap profit above my break even point, right? So again, we are in our analysis, we have to know um, where are we on the demand curve? What are our fixed expenses? And here we're imputing what is the break even market share as part of the entire market in view of the context, the competition. Um, and once I know that, then I recognize that as I move up the market share from 12%, anything above that, I'm able to reap uh, a profit beyond simply my fixed expenses. And this is a very helpful thing for us to know as marketing executives so that we can determine if we are in a position here where, let's say, we reside in this break-even market share for a particular industry, then we recognize that we're at least certainly there's an analysis that says if I want to increase my market share, what do I need to do in terms of pricing? If I lower my price, I need to make sure that my increased volumes is going to more than cover my price reduction at the aggregate level. Here we can see, we talked about a little bit earlier, different product lines, let's say across Procter and Gamble, and here, for example, Tide seems to have a less elastic negative 1.3 versus here where I'm at negative 2.4. So fab, we could sort of conclude that this is a more of a commoditized kind of product. Um, and so here we can see that through the overall portfolio, most let's see, 22, uh, 42, 43, 63, um, 73, 76, about three-quarters of the market share is made up of whisk, tide, surf, and era. And so here we're trying to sort of optimize the portfolio of our profitability associated with where each of these brands reside on each of their kinked demand or each of the aggregate kink demand curve. All right. Well, thank you. I certainly enjoyed talking about different pricing strategies as a function of where does the product reside or the brand reside on the customer value map. So God bless you. Dr. Ross signing off.